Hello Geeks, Ryan Schumacher here, and we're on to our second video about the second coming, going through Tom Wright's Surprised by Hope. We had spent far more than I expected, full 45 minutes, setting up the views on the millennium and the second coming, giving a bit of an introduction to dispensationalism, which motivates a lot of the popular ideas around the second coming. So now we're going to get into the biblical data. So this is the first of three biblical sections that we're going to have, and we're going to focus on the Ascension and what that tells us about the second coming. This is derived from chapter 7 of Tom Wright's Surprised by Hope, if you are following along in the book. But we're going to look at the Ascension passage, Acts 1, 6 through 11, and then talk about what that tells us and how we should understand the second coming from that perspective. So starting with verse 6, so when they had come together, this is the beginning of Acts. I suppose I should drop a little context in here. So Luke wrote both Luke and Acts. This is intended to be volume 1 and volume 2 of the same story. So this is following on the end of the Gospel of Luke, though he had a tag ending at the end of the Gospel of Luke about the Ascension. Here, at the beginning of Acts, there's some expansion being given. And so we're looking now at a more detailed account of what's at the very end of the Gospel of Luke. Okay, so Acts chapter 1, verse 6. So when they come together, they asked him, that's Jesus, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? So one of the things I want to focus on here is look at what they are still thinking, even on the other side of the resurrection. How are they understanding what's going on? They're still looking at this through the lens of Jewish expectations. Not only just Jewish expectations, but the specific Jewish expectations of tangible covenant fulfillment. These are the things that they were thinking for a while underneath Rome. So they're not supposed to be under Rome. That was the understanding. And right now, they're still under the political domination of Rome. Jesus is not done until he kicks the Romans out. Right? That's what's supposed to happen. They're asking him about this is this when you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Cool. You died and then you came back to life. So that's amazing. We didn't expect that. So remember when you were heading into Jerusalem before and we thought you were going to throw the Romans out? So can you go do that now? Like, that's what they were thinking. When you look at what the Jews expected, the Jewish expectations were focused on the covenants that they had. There was a land guarantee in the Abrahamic and the Sinai covenant that this land was going to belong to them. There was the God dwelling with his people that came from the Sinai covenant. I will walk with you and be your God, and you will be my people. And the cloud descends onto the tabernacle. And when they're finally restored a right relationship with God in Ezekiel, the glorious presence comes back. The glorious presence, the Shekinah glory, is the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night in the desert. It's there in Solomon's temple. That is the sign of covenant blessing. So there's that. There's the Davidic covenant about returning the kingdom. So not only will they have land with Yahweh dwelling on Zion with them, but they will also have their kingdom back. Because the son of David, the line of David, was supposed to rule on the throne forever. Now they went into exile, but they've been waiting for the return of the line of David. They've been under the Babylonians, they've been under the Persians, they've been under the Seleucids for a period of time, then the Greeks, and now the Romans. They were eschatologically waiting for David to come back, or the line of David to be restored. So this is the background of the question. So when they come together after the resurrection, Lord, is this when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? Because that is their eschatology. It's the fulfillment of these covenants in Jesus. So he replied, it is not for you to know the times or the periods that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. Remember, Pentecost is coming up very soon. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So, this idea, Judea and Samaria, the ends of the earth right there, this is doubling down on the Great Commission. This is Abrahamic, in my opinion. This is going out to, through them, through Israel, and Israel's Messiah, the blessing goes to the whole world. So you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem. So that's where they are locally. then uniting Judea and Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. So the side note on why Judea and Samaria, this is the northern and the southern kingdom. So Judea and Samaria together represent all of Israel and Israel's reunification. The promises were all made to all of Israel. This is the united monarchy before the division of the kingdom. But Saul, David, and Solomon were the three kings over united people of Israel. Then after Solomon's death, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, you had the division of the kingdom, the north and the south. And so you have the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. So Judea and Samaria, saying that they will be the witnesses to Judea and Samaria. They're in Judea, in Jerusalem, but they are this is not just for the Judeans. There's a lot of bad blood between the north and the south. This is not just for the Judeans. This is for the Samaritans as well. This is the reunification of Israel, and then going to the entire world. So the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the Israel's God returning to Zion, the Messiah coming here, is intended for the entire world. So that's his response. But the time or the period, you'll know. Even though what's interesting is he has said here that this appears to be more about Pentecost than it is about the second coming. So they ask him, is the kingdom going to return to Israel? It's not for you to know the time and the authority, but you will get power from the Holy Spirit. We actually see that in the very next chapter. And then you will be my witnesses in all of these places. Well, you see that in the rest of the Acts of the Apostles. That appears to be what Jesus is talking about here. So, and then when he had said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up and a cloud took him out of their sight. Not what we expected, but okay, let's roll with it. This is what happened. So a few points to make here. So as they were watching, so when he said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up. So this is something they could see. If anybody has this sort of, is the ascension really something that happened, or was it more of a spiritual? No. The text, as they were watching, he was lifted up. This is not apocalyptic, okay? This is narrative. Acts of the Apostles is straightforward narrative. There's a little bit in Stephen where appears to be having like near-death experience sort of vision that could be interpreted apocalyptically. Peter has the vision of the sheet coming down, which is to be understood apocalyptically, including the interpretation that's given, which we talked about in the Hell series. This is straightforward narrative. And so this is something that they are seeing. They were just having a conversation with Jesus, just like they did in the Gospels. And now as they're watching, he's lifted up. So lifted up too, he went up. Lest we take it metaphorically, the thing that they could see was that he went up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. So the cloud, what does the cloud signify? If you've been around Bible Geeks for long enough, you get what the cloud is. The cloud is the Shekinah glory. This is Yahweh's dramatic presence. This is what was seen at the Exodus, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, what descended onto the tabernacle and the temple. This is the presence that appeared at the Transfiguration as well. The cloud descends upon the mountain when Moses and Elijah and Jesus are talking at the Transfiguration. So anytime you see the cloud, this is the dramatic presence of Yahweh. And interestingly, too, and I don't have any other point on this, I'm sure others do, but does this remind you of anybody else? The cloud just sweeping people up. That would be Enoch and Elijah. The same sort of thing, the presence of Yahweh sort of snatching a few people up, to use a 1 Thessalonians word. So something that we should take from this is that this is something that they could see. And Jesus, as he was lifted up and carried away by what appears to be the Shekinah glory of God. So somewhat odd, and it really took until studying this passage in graduate school for me to grasp this, but an important doctrinal point, Jesus' body was taken up, sort of like Enoch and Elijah. I skipped ahead a bit, but the Christian doctrine is that Jesus exists today bodily in heaven, which means a few things. First of all, bodies can exist in heaven. We talked about heaven. Heaven is where Jesus is right now. Heaven is where people go. Bodies can exist in heaven. The other thing, too, is that Jesus is in his embodied resurrection body, transformed body, but nonetheless embodied state. He didn't get just assumed back into the Father. That's actually the doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses will say that Jesus was Michael, the archangel, the master worker, who ceased to exist and became Jesus. I'm sure Jehovah's Witnesses aren't watching, but if anybody is watching, I might be getting this point a little muddled. But Jesus is the same as Michael, the master worker, but he ceased to exist in the spiritual form, was created in the bodily form, and then ceased to exist as a body and became a spirit afterwards. That's not Christian doctrine. Christian doctrine is that Jesus' resurrection body was one that ascended into heaven. He exists bodily in heaven right now. And so the omnipresence of Jesus is not a spirit, but it's sort of this dimensional aspect. That's the way we would have to describe it, that whatever dimension heaven exists in, it is able to be, break in all places at all times in our space-time. But it's not another geography in our space-time continuum. It's not a non-space-time continuum. It is a different one that is intersecting in a strange way with ours, which is ultimately the purpose of heaven and earth. They intersect at the temple, mainly, which is Jesus and then the believer. But that ultimately that's what's going to happen, is the merging of these two dimensions. So some other texts, Philippians 3:21, he will transform the body of our humiliation that it may be conformed to the body of his glory. So here this is almost assuming, again, that Jesus does bodily exist. As does 1 Timothy 2:5, for there is one God, there is also one mediator between God and humankind, the Messiah Jesus, himself human. Jesus retains his humanity, albeit transformed humanity, but the incarnate Jesus still exists incarnate, like as a body now, which is just like mind-blowing. Okay, so moving right along. Tom Wright on the bodily ascension. So the idea that the human Jesus now being in heaven in his thoroughly embodied risen state comes as a shock to many people. Our culture is so used to the Platonic idea that heaven is by definition a place of spiritual, non-material reality, so that the idea of being a solid body, or a solid body being not only present but also thoroughly at home there, seems like a category mistake. And indeed it does. The Ascension invites us to rethink all this. And after all, why did we suppose that we knew what heaven was? Only because our culture has suggested things to us. I think that's really profound. Like, this is, if we think about heaven differently, we think about Jesus differently. Jesus is not a spirit. Jesus is embodied. Jesus retains his humanity in heaven right now, which is just pretty incredible. All right, what's all this got to do with the second coming? Ryan, are we talking about the second coming, not the incarnation? Yes, that's coming up now. Acts 1:10 through 11. So the very next verses, after he's taken up on the cloud. Suddenly 2 men in white robes stood by them. They said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up toward heaven? This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." So 2 men in white robes. We've seen men in white robes before at the end of the Gospels. These are angels. I'm trying to imagine the other case. So then a couple dudes walked up in robes and were like, "Hey guys, you know Jesus is coming back, right?" I mean, this is obviously not the case. Luke includes this detail because these are angelic beings. And I like the angels. You gotta love the angels here, right? My read on this is like, guys, why are you looking up there? Didn't he just give you a job to do? Get to work. He's coming back. But what does this even mean, he's coming back? He is the king. And just like the kings went off to war in the ancient times, or they went off on a royal visit someplace else, everybody knew the king was coming back. And there was administration that they had to do while the king was out. That is just what they were given. They were given those orders to be his administrators while he was out. But here we see the way he's come, the way you saw him taken up is the way he's going to go back. So what can we know from this passage? To be honest, not much, but we can know some things. First, there will be a second coming. This is plain as day. There ain't no two ways about that. There is one way about that. Now, there's nothing here of a rapture. There's no commentary on a millennial kingdom. There's nothing about whether he's going to return before said millennial kingdom or after said millennial kingdom, and who's going to be included and what's going to happen with tribulation. Like, none of those specifics are present here. We don't get that from this. We do get the fact of a second coming. So we should expect something like the Ascension when he comes back. And this is where the Bible is making a metaphysical claim that when Jesus comes back, it's going to be like what you saw, but like rewinding. And if that sounds strange, I invite you to look at Revelation 21 at the very end. And then I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a, goodness gracious. I'm just going to fix that right here. Not prepared as a bridge, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And while I'm there, I'm going to fix this too. What I really want to say right now is live television, folks. But it's not, it's recorded. But I'm just going to roll with it. Coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So this is, end of Revelation has the descent from heaven as being the way that the new creation comes about. And you have the king on the throne. So however this is intended, this is written a straightforward historical narrative. This is the way in which the angels described it. Whatever happens when Jesus comes back, it's going to be something fantastic like that. I think that just comes across in the text. Now, we will not know the day nor the hour. And in fact, Jesus is like, it's not really for you to know these things. So that's like, he's saying the details here, yeah, but there will be a second coming, and it is going to be something pretty incredible. So that's what we can get from the Ascension passage. Jesus bodily ascended. He will bodily return. He will come back, and it's going to be something like what we just saw in the Ascension, but in reverse. So if anybody is wondering, is this crazy liberal talking about, the second coming not happening? No, there is a second coming. We see it plain as day right here. Other passages that, people who may object to the idea of the second coming as a literal event might look at some of these other passages we'll talk about, like 1 Thessalonians 4 or the Son of Man passages, and say, I don't think those mean what you think they mean, Princess Bride style. But no, this is like as darn straightforward as you get. There will be a second coming of Jesus, and it will be something incredible. So next, in the subsequent videos, we're now going to get into some of the other passages, and where there is some more ambiguity and some more things to sort out, and the traditional interpretations are probably not going to cut it. So we're going to dig into those next. I encourage you to watch. Please subscribe. Thank you very much, and God bless.